In April of 1928, the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus took over the new Madison Square Garden. Crowds flocked to see Habu lift 100-pound weights using only his tongue, and John L. Sullivan, the boxing elephant. But something even more unusual was taking place at the same time. The New York Rangers had made it to the Stanley Cup Final in just their second year. The circus took precedence and exiled the Rangers from their own home. Therefore, the entire best-of-5 series would have to be played at the Montreal Forum, home of their opponents, the Maroons. There was some talk about shifting the Rangers' home games to Detroit, but all involved agreed it was better to just shelter in place for the duration of the series. The Maroons had won the Stanley Cup just 2 years earlier, in 1926. The NHL approved the creation of a second team in New York to go along with the Americans a month later. That team would become original owner Tex Rickard's Rangers. The Maroons' opponent in 1926 were the Victoria Cougars of the original Western Hockey League, which was folding at the conclusion of the series. The Cougars had beaten the Montreal Canadiens in the Stanley Cup Final the year before that. The Canadiens won it the year before that. Lester Patrick had been a major on-ice contributor to those Cougars teams. When the league folded and his Cougars lost the final, he retired as a player at age 42 and moved to New York to coach Texas Rangers. In some ways, a final showdown between a Lester Patrick team and a Montreal team seemed inevitable, though improbable. He couldn't have known that his playing days weren't actually over, though. In 1924-25, the NHL added its first American team in Boston. The following season, they would add the Americans and Pittsburgh Pirates. The Rangers, Chicago, and Detroit would follow the year after that. The league suddenly had more American teams than Canadian ones, and split the league into American and Canadian divisions. The playoffs would feature 3 quick rounds. The first 2 would feature 2-game total goals series. The Stanley Cup Final would be decided by a best-of-5 showdown, no longer between East and West, but now between North and South. The Rangers skated past the Pittsburgh Pirates and Boston Bruins on their way to the final. The Maroons made it by the Ottawa Senators and crosstown rivals, the Canadiens. In doing so, the Maroons had secured the now-forgotten and once-lost George Kennedy Memorial Trophy, emblematic of city champions between the two clubs. After the deciding game, Howie Morenz and Herb Gardner of the Canadiens congratulated the Maroons in their locker room. Nobody thought much of the Rangers' prospects in the final. To accommodate the massive overflow crowds, the Montreal Star set up loudspeakers in front of the Morgan store on St. Catherine Street and broadcast their own play-by-play. The report could be heard throughout the area of Phillips Square. Crowds of 10 to 25,000 filled the square and lined the surrounding streets. They cheered along to the broadcast and a 2-0 Maroons victory in Game 1. The game was not nearly as exciting inside the building. The Forum missed the boisterous energy of the Habs crowd. A stifling Maroons defense took care of the rest. The Rangers struggled to enter the zone all night and got no high-danger shots towards Clint Benedict. In the final 2 frames, Maroons defenders prevented the Rangers from enjoying any sustained offensive zone time at all. Game 2 is the one everyone remembers. It was another tight-checking defensive battle. Both teams kept the other's shots to the perimeter. Early in the second of the scoreless draw, Maroons defender Dunk Monroe sent an offhand feed to Nels Stewart as the two broke away behind the Blue Shirts' defensive line. Stewart sent a hard backhand shot on goal. The puck hit Rangers goaler Lorne Chabot square in the left eye. As Chabot was being attended to and helped off the ice, the officials sent both teams to their locker rooms. Chabot's eye was completely swollen shut. When it became clear that he couldn't continue, Lester Patrick and Maroons manager Eddie Girard held a conference with league officials. Already down a game in the series, Patrick was desperate. Senators goalie Alex Connell was in the stands. Many considered Connell the best in the game. Patrick wanted to use him on an emergency basis. Girard said, "Suckers were born yesterday, Lester." Minor leaguer Huey McCormick was also in the stands. Even he would be an adequate replacement. Gerard said, "You're talking to the wrong man." Several years earlier, Patrick himself had allowed the Leafs to use an emergency sub for an injured goalie. It was Eddie Gerard himself. "Sorry," Gerard said, "I can't hear you." League officials agreed with Gerard. The replacement goalie would have to come from the Rangers' ranks. In the Rangers' locker room, he looked for a volunteer. None came forward. Patrick then gave a nod to Rangers trainer Harry Westerby and said, "Harry, I'm in goal." Rangers star Frank Boucher said, "Wait a minute." Patrick started strapping on Chabot's pads. "We'll get somebody else," Boucher continued. "Anybody." After a 20-minute delay, both teams tramped back out onto the ice. The 44-year-old Patrick took his spot between the pipes. A Hall of Fame defenseman during his playing days, Patrick had never played goal a day in his life. The Rangers defenders understood the assignment. They boxed out anyone who tried to get in close. Early defender Taffy Abel played the game of his life, roughing up the Maroons and limiting their shot attempts. It took 5 minutes for the Maroons to sneak a shot on goal. It was a weak one that skidded along the ice surface. Patrick stopped it easily. Maybe they had a shot after all. The Rangers escaped the second period still in a scoreless draw. Just seconds into the third, Bill Cook scored for the Rangers on the man advantage. About midway through, hot-handed Maroons rookie Russell Oatman flipped a changeup from the blue line, which nearly caught Patrick napping. It was a smart strategy to deploy against an inexperienced goalie. A Nels Stewart strike off a Hooley Smith rebound tied the score with less than 5 minutes remaining in the third. In overtime, Patrick faced hard shots from Smith and Stewart, stopping them with a pair of beauties. The Montreal press were won over by his, quote, "prodigious feats of netminding." The game ended off a Ching Johnson rush with a sloppy finish. Johnson passed to Frank Boucher in the slot. Boucher directed the puck into the net off Smith's skate. 2-1 Rangers final. After the game, it was revealed that Chabot had suffered a hemorrhage in his eye and would be unavailable for the remainder of the series. This time, the league had a plan. Member clubs only carried one goalie on the roster in those days, but the league had an emergency backup who could be used by any and all clubs who required it. That goalie was Joe Miller. He'd started the year as the Americans' regular goalie, but finished it with the Niagara Falls Cataracts of the Can Pro circuit. Those in the forum who knew who he was remembered him as a senior hockey star in Ottawa. Game 3 ended 2-0 in favor of the Maroons. If it weren't for Miller's netminding, however, the score would have been more lopsided. Those who saw him play that night said he was magnificent. He was even better in Game 4, a 1-0 Rangers victory. Once again, Johnson and Abel did their best to shelter the man between their pipes, and once again, their best was good enough. But here's something that's almost never mentioned when the Lester Patrick goaltending story comes up. Though the Maroons came out on top of Game 3, they didn't come out of it intact. A scrap between the Rangers' Paul Thompson and the Maroons' Joe Lamb resulted in both players being ejected. Each was suspended for the following game as well. It was clear that Lamb's absence imbalanced the Maroons' lineup, and they couldn't get much going offensively in Game 4. Hooley Smith played nearly the entire game without a substitution. There's no telling how the outcome changes if both teams ice a full lineup. However, in the game of hockey, there are no excuses, only results. Before the fifth and deciding game, a snowstorm blanketed the city with slush. Scalpers with wet cuffs hawked single tickets for $35 apiece, an astronomical sum. Once again, Phillips Square was packed to overflowing. On the ice, the Maroons carried the play, but the Rangers got the scores. A rising shot from Smith struck Miller in his right eye. Physicians attended him for what felt like an eternity. Miller's eye was nearly swollen shut. The Rangers bench sweated as Patrick prepared to lace them up yet again. But after 10 minutes, Miller returned and received a massive cheer from the otherwise hostile crowd. Johnson fought through leg, nose, and eye injuries of his own to turn aside Montreal attackers at nearly every turn. When one got through, Miller played brilliantly. Time and time again, he turned aside sure chances and frustrated the home team. Chabot stood on the sidelines wearing a black eye patch. He hadn't been released from hospital yet and had to return after the game, but he couldn't miss this one. The game was 1-0 Rangers in the third when Oatman put one over a sprawling Miller. The crowd, already in a frenzy, exploded in cheers. But when an offside call negated the score, the cheers darkened to something more visceral. The ice surface was littered with torn-up game programs, several hats, and even a chair. The game was delayed another 10 minutes for cleanup. Still up 1-0 with less than 5 minutes to go in the third, Boucher squirted through the Maroons' defensive wall, broke the ankles of the lone back-checker, then deked Benedict's pants off for the 2-0 score. Montreal got within 1 2 minutes later, but it wasn't enough. The Rangers became just the second American team to win the Stanley Cup after Seattle did it in 1917. They were the first American NHL team to win it, and they were the only visiting club to win a Stanley Cup at the Montreal Forum until Calgary did it in 1989. The victory solidified Patrick's net-minding feat into all-time hockey lore, but the real story was the brilliant performance of Miller and the Rangers' combination of stout defending and a balanced two-line attack. Miller was traded that offseason by the Americans to the Pirates for Hall of Famer Roy Werters and finished his NHL career with a paltry 24, 89, and 16 record on a pitiful team. No disrespect to Haboo with the iron tongue, but the circumstances of the Rangers' 1928 Stanley Cup win were crazier than any circus performance. The box score reads like a roll call. 13 players were called for penalties. 10 of them were given game misconducts and tossed from the game. The problem was, they were sent back onto the ice before anybody knew who had gotten ejected, and, with nothing left to lose for the ejected players, a second Donnybrook started. In the aftermath were broken bones, broken friendships, and the end of more than one career. It came to be known as the Good Friday Massacre, and it became the defining moment in the heated Montreal Canadiens-Quebec Nordiques rivalry. As the siren sounded to end the second period, Nordiques center Dale Hunter pushed Canadiens sophomore Guy Carbonneau into Nordiques goalie Dan Bouchard. Hunter and Carbonneau got tangled up on the ice, and Hunter started mugging Carbonneau after the play. Canadiens captain Bob Gainey stepped in to defend Carbonneau, and 2 Nordiques converged on him. Within seconds, everybody from both teams was off the bench and crowding. The whole thing was fairly tame until Canadiens enforcer Chris Nyland sucker-punched Randy Moeller in the crowd and started pummeling him. That's when things got ugly. By 1984, bench-clearing brawls were not an unusual sight, but this one in particular was arguably the ugliest and most violent the storied Montreal Forum ever saw. The arena organist played the kalinka as 14 different pairs of combatants squared off and traded blows. Moeller was bleeding badly and wouldn't stop chasing Nyland, who led him around in circles. The 2 backup goalies were into a tilt of their own in the corner. Nordiques winger Louis Slager was tangled up with Habs defender Jean Hamel. The 2 of them were good friends, even roommates when Hamel was with the Nordiques. Canadiens winger Mario Tremblay broke Nordiques star Peter Stastny's nose. When that fight was over, Tremblay continued to skate around the ice, looking for spots to help teammates. The linesmen were in the thick of the hottest battles, hands full of blue and white jerseys, trying to break up fights. Referee Bruce Hood stood near the boards taking numbers. Tremblay wandered over towards the Slager-Hamel battle. Slager felt threatened. He threw a left that caught Hamel in the side of the eye, completely off guard. Hamel fell to the ice and just lay there, face down. Slager was hustled into the dressing room as Canadiens medical trainer Gaetan Lefebvre attended to Hamel, who still wasn't moving, blood pooling on the ice beneath his right eye. The sight of Hamel laying prone took the fight out of everybody, and both teams retired to their locker rooms for intermission. Everybody involved, and everybody watching, understood that this was about more than just hockey. Some called the Montreal Forum the Mecca of hockey, others called it a cathedral. All agreed it was a sacred space within the game, and that space had been violated in this April 20th, 1984 playoff matchup. But for Montrealers, the violation took place years earlier. The Canadiens were a cultural touchstone for Quebecois. For French-speaking Canadians, the Habs represented something of their own as a cultural minority and a bulwark against marginalization. They'd developed a chip on their shoulder. Both the political rules and the hockey ones were crafted by English speakers in Ontario. The Canadiens gave a voice to the voiceless. Then, in 1972, a rival professional team popped up 150 miles away. Some fans in Quebec City were glad to change allegiances, still smarting from when the Canadiens had plucked Quebec City's very own star player, Jean Beliveau, out from under them 20 years earlier. The first actual blow in the Battle of Quebec was landed when the Nordiques signed away Habs star defender J.C. Tremblay. The Canadiens were owned by Molson Breweries, and the Nordiques by Carling O'Keefe. The two clubs formed a rivalry off the ice before they'd ever played a game against each other due to direct competition in business. Before the NHL-WHA merger, there were 3 Canadian teams in each league. When the Canadiens voted against the merger, hockey fans around Canada boycotted Molson, causing them to change their vote. There was big money involved. The Canadiens and Maple Leafs got the bulk of Hockey Night in Canada broadcast money, and were reluctant to share it with other clubs like the Nordiques who'd forced their way into the conversation. The on-ice rivalry had developed slowly, but soon snowballed. Their first meeting was held at the Forum. The Montreal crowd saluted their neighbors with a rousing cheer. When the upstarts beat the Habs in the next meeting at Le Colisée, the warm feelings were spent. The two clubs were put in the same division for the 1981-82 season and met in the playoffs for the first time that year. The best-of-5 series went to overtime of Game 5, and a Dale Hunter dagger ended it just 22 seconds later. Game 4 of that series was when the bad blood began to spill over onto the ice. Slager was undressing in the locker room during intermission, assuming he would be done for the night, when head coach Michel Bergeron told him that everybody was going back onto the bench for the third period. There had been a screw-up. Neither coach had been informed of which players had been ejected. Normally, in such an abnormal situation, the supervisor of officials would be sent to each dressing room to inform the teams of who wouldn't be returning. But there was such a confusing backlog of infractions to figure out that the horn sounded to end the intermission before anyone had been able to do so. The PA announcer began reading the names of the ejected players with both full squads on the ice. Somebody told Mark Hunter of the Canadiens that he would be getting the boot. With that in mind, he started skating around looking for Slager. This kicked off a second brawl. Wally Weir and Mike McPhee were the first to pair off. Mark Hunter started swinging his stick at Slager through a screen of blue sweaters. Richard Sevigny went after Dale Hunter. Dale was chasing Mark. Mark shook him off, then Dale got spear tackled to the ice by Tremblay. Tremblay got mugged by a gang of blue sweaters. Peter Stastny jumped in while Tremblay was already down on the ice and started wailing on him. Revenge for the busted nose. Guy Lafleur ripped Stastny off the pile. In the aftermath, Bergeron claimed Montreal head coach Jacques Lemaire had sent Sevigny to try to get Dale Hunter ejected. When it was said and done, nearly an hour of real time had passed. When the penalties and ejections had been announced, both benches had been shortened considerably. Each of the Nordiques' top 2 centers, Stastny and Hunter, had been ejected. Slager and Weir had also been ejected. Both backups had been ejected. Nyland, Tremblay, McPhee, and Mark Hunter had been removed from the Montreal side, as well as Hamel, who had left due to injury. Montreal had lost depth, but kept its top players. Quebec had been decimated. Lemaire had specifically told his skill players to stay out of the melee. Doing so had been agony for Larry Robinson. When play resumed, Quebec took a 2-0 lead on a Michel Goulet goal. Robinson had seen enough. He laid a thunderous hit on Antoine Stastny that electrified the Forum crowd. The hit set the tone for the final period, and Montreal fed off the energy of the crowd, scoring 5 straight to take the game and the series. During the traditional handshake line, Lemaire refused to shake Bergeron's hand. Montreal would lose to the Islanders in the Wales Conference Final. As a side note, it was the 19th consecutive playoff series victory for the Islanders, a record that still stands. Many observers blamed referee Bruce Hood for allowing the situation to get out of hand. Hood accepted the blame gracefully and retired that offseason. Programmer's note: in those days, the game was patrolled by a single referee, not two like in today's NHL. Jean Hamel was done for the year. He'd nearly lost his eye. In the following preseason, a puck hit the same eye again, and he'd had enough. He retired practically on the spot. In 1990, he appeared on a radio program with Slager. It didn't go well. The friendship had been irrevocably broken. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing. We tell hockey stories here from all eras, calmly and in detail. If that's your thing, stick around. There's a lot more of these. And if there's one you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments. Now, back to the video. First, Howie Young dreamed of being a cowboy. Then, he was taken to a hockey game, and that changed everything, or at the very least, created a detour. He had talent and a passion for the game, but he was already a notorious drunk by age 15. He played his way into Montreal Canadiens training camp by age 18, but was sent home nursing a hangover. While with Hershey in 1961, he went missing for days after a game in Rochester. When he found his way back to the team, he was traded to Detroit, and that was just the beginning of his problems. In 3 tempestuous seasons as a Red Wing, he would sometimes disappear for days at a time, skipping practices and even games. Sometimes he'd show up too drunk to skate. When he was well enough to play, he'd get into altercations with fans and officials. His antics resulted in multiple fines and suspensions by both the league and the Red Wings. When they'd finally had enough of him, they sent him to the farm team in Edmonton. On the way there, he got into a bar brawl, fighting side by side with Detroit Lions defensive tackle Gil Maines against 5 attackers. One night, Young jumped from a hotel balcony onto a chandelier. Coach Bud Poyle had to climb a ladder to get him down. Another time, a rodeo parade headed down Jasper Avenue. Somebody told Poyle that Young was the star of the show, riding a prize buffalo that was owned by a rodeo clown. Poyle laughed off the report until he got to the rink and found the buffalo tied to a post outside. Inside, Young showed off his new cowboy boots. Another night, he got into a fight with a spectator and spent the night in an Edmonton jail. He then helped the Flyers to a Lester Patrick Cup victory as WHL champions. Such was the push-pull of his career. He had all of the ability, but none of the self-restraint needed for professional recognition. Not long after, Young went to Kitchener, Ontario to cheer on the Junior Oil Kings as they took on the Hamilton Red Wings for the Memorial Cup. Young, wearing a 10-gallon hat and cowboy boots, leapt to the top of the rink boards and whooped it up, causing a major disturbance during the game. It got bad enough that Kitchener Memorial Garden manager H.M. Crosby asked him to take his seat. When he refused, things escalated. Eventually, Young found himself in an altercation with Hamilton coach Eddie Bush, which spilled from the stands into the locker room area. Bush elbowed Young in the face as he was being escorted out of the building by an off-duty cop. Young thought the cop had done it and lashed out. The officer suffered a black eye, facial lacerations, and elbow and back injuries requiring hospitalization. When the case went to court, he ended up receiving a suspended sentence and a $100 fine. The next year, he swore he'd reformed. To his credit, he spent the entire year with the big club. He ended up shattering the NHL single-season record with 273 penalty minutes. By then, he was infamous. He even made the cover of Sports Illustrated that January. But after the Wings were bounced from the Stanley Cup Final by the Maple Leafs, he was sent to the Blackhawks for Roger Crozier. On his way out of town, he forked a hunk of sausage off a cop's plate at a diner. A fight ensued, and he was arrested and jailed on a drunken disorderly rap. The frustrating part for hockey fans was that some considered him one of the best defenders in the game. He was a punishing checker, but too often he'd cross the line. Many of his opponents were cut open for stitches, and he broke more than a few bones. Some said he would kick his own grandmother down the stairs if she had the puck. The problem was, he just couldn't stop getting in his own way. Eventually, his reputation got so bad with officials that he would be penalized just for bumping into an opponent. Smart players knew they could draw a penalty just by falling down around him. One game in Toronto, Young was sent to the penalty box with both minor and major penalties after a heated battle. While there, Young was heckled mercilessly by spectators. Normally, Young would simply smart back and go about his business. But when Young saw where the heckles were coming from, it enraged him. It was Leafs president and governor Stafford Smythe and a lady companion. An altercation broke out. Young directed several severely obscene curses towards the occupants of the box seats and ended up spitting at the lady, hitting her full in the face with the loogie. To make matters worse, Maple Leaf Gardens in the 1960s was a quiet place of hockey veneration. Everybody in the building heard what he said. When the dust had settled, he was suspended by the league indefinitely. Days went by with no resolution. The team kept playing, and he sat on the sidelines. Before the issue could be resolved, he faced a season-long or even lifetime ban from league president Clarence Campbell. Teammate Reggie Fleming was also part of the initial scrum and came forward in Young's defense. He revealed that the referees had also been needling and heckling him. Campbell reprimanded Young for conduct unbecoming and slapped him with a 5-game suspension. Time served. Staff Smythe also got a talking to. But to Young, Campbell said, "You were the greatest detriment to hockey that ever laced up a pair of skates." Young lost the trust of his coach. He only played 3 more games with the Hawks, and even then in an extremely limited role. A little over a month later, they gave up on him altogether, selling his rights to the WHL's Los Angeles Blades. He hadn't even lasted a year in Chicago. But before being sent to LA, he still had to clear through waivers. Young had faith. While waiting, Young said he'd never return to the minors. Somebody would pick him up. And even if nobody claimed him, Young said, he'd refuse to report. But nobody in the big league wanted him. When he cleared waivers, the deal was done. If he wanted to continue playing the sport he loved for a living, he'd have to do it at a lower level. At first, Young refused to answer his phone. When reporters caught up with him, he slammed his apartment door in their faces. At 26, he was a washout. When he finally reported to the Blades, he said, "My only regret is the difference in money." Blades coach Alf Pike was skeptical. When he arrived, Pike remarked, "He's in his prime, if he has a prime." At 213 pounds, Young was about 25 pounds over his ideal playing weight, but he was an instant fan favorite. One game against Vancouver, Young skated onto the ice wearing a Beatles wig. He took it off to reveal a mohawk. However, untimely penalties, missed planes, and practices combined with an unpredictable demeanor caused by drinking soured the opinions of many, especially Pike. "I figure," Pike said, grimacing, "that Young has cost us 10 games. At one point, Pike had a deal worked out to trade Young to another team, but management stepped in to block it. Not everyone had turned on him, though. His play caught the eye of Frank Sinatra. Sinatra thought Young's good looks and tough guy presence would make for a good soldier in his new war picture, None But the Brave. Young agreed to appear as a regular cast member in the film. He had one line, "Damn mosquitoes." When he returned from filming in Hawaii, the LA lifestyle started taking over. He led the WHL in penalty minutes in back-to-back years and played the last 4 games of the 1965 season half-cut. He'd hit rock bottom. He sensed in his gut that his hockey career was finished. He was already divorced. Now his new sweetheart had left him. "I thought I was going to die a couple times," he said. "I was scared as hell of dying drunk. I said, 'God, don't take me. I don't want to die drunk.' I was killing myself. I didn't think I was going to live past 30. In April of that year came the most pivotal moment of his life. He spent the day in the drunk tank with about 18 others. But one of them got under his skin. Most of them were saying they wished they could get out of there and grab a beer. But one guy just sat on the bench and said, "I go to 37 meetings, and I go sober for 37 weeks. Then I have one drink, and here I am." It turned out this man was also named Young. He told Howie about Alcoholics Anonymous. He didn't give him a whole sales pitch. He simply said, "Why don't you see if they can help you out?" And he did. The experience sent a shockwave through Young, and he started regularly attending AA meetings. Those around him noticed the change immediately. The transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Before long, even the media began to note the change. Young attributed it to God. He said, "I'd always had a belief in God. I'd just forgotten about him. This time I threw in the sponge and said, 'God, you take over.' I just put it in his hands." There was no guarantee the transformation would lead back to the NHL. Still, he didn't lose sight of his bigger goals. "Whether I make it back is immaterial," he said. "My major ambition right now is to stay sober." On the ice, the Blades believed he was finally living up to his potential, playing sound defense and avoiding bad penalties. One night, he missed curfew, but these days he had good reason. New coach Lynn Patrick didn't lose faith in him. He explained to the meeting that he was at an AA meeting and then went over to help someone with a problem at their house. "I wasn't worried," Patrick said, "because I know Howie will never take another drink." He became a fan favorite again. He was back in shape, down to around 190 pounds. After getting clean, he'd married his sweetheart. This time, while getting heckled, he would no longer lash out. To his abusers, he would say, "I was an alcoholic. What's your excuse?" Sid Abel, coach and GM of the Wings, started kicking tires on a return to the Motor City. "Every report we've received," Abel said, "has been how good he was playing and how good he's been skating. He's not taking those foolish penalties anymore. Talent never had any bearing on Howie's position with Detroit. He's got the talent, and I think he can help us now." When Blade's new bench boss, Fernie Flaman, told him he'd be traded back to Detroit, Young was happy. He said, "All I can think of is that day in jail and all the wonderful things that have happened to me since. I'm humbly grateful." Once again, there was a snag. The Wings had initially traded Al LeBrun and Murray Hall for Young, but they were on Detroit's protected list. NHL rules at the time required teams to waive players on their protected list before trading them to a minor league club. The old Young might have gotten himself into trouble while waiting, with impatience and disappointment. Instead, he said, "I'm calm and serene here. All I know is I'm supposed to get on a plane tomorrow and be in New York." When he arrived, he joined a last-place team in Detroit as its only right-shot defenseman. He played each of Detroit's last 44 games and helped improve the winning percentage, but not enough to make the playoffs. Still, Gordie Howe was impressed. Regarding Young, he said, "He's still going around in circles, but different circles." Howie Young left hockey in 1975, then again in 1979. He attempted a comeback in 1985 at age 48, but it didn't go far. He had a hard time letting go of hockey, but his dream of becoming a cowboy had never died. He settled into the American Southwest with his third wife, living in Oklahoma, Arizona, and New Mexico. For a living, he drove trucks, operated heavy machinery, and did odd jobs. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 1999. In a weakened state and on his deathbed, his cousin came to visit him. He asked Young if there was anybody he'd like to apologize to. Young flashed his trademark grin, laughed, and said, "Everybody I ever ran across." After getting sober back in 1965, he stayed sober for the rest of his life. He thought he could help others just by example. "If I could just look after myself, it will help others," he said. "Maybe this is why God gave me this hockey ability, and it took me years to find out." In 1982, the Washington Capitals weren't just losing money. they were about to disappear. The league had already discussed shutting them down. Ownership was ready to walk away. The only thing that kept them alive was a last-minute push from their own fans. And then, a few weeks later, a trade was made. Not for a superstar, not for a goal scorer, but for a stay-at-home defenseman who completely remade the team and showed them how to win. By 1982, the Washington Capitals had lost about $20 million. Things were so bad that the club didn't offer season tickets for the coming 1982-83 season. At the annual NHL Board of Governors meeting in June of 1982, owner Abe Pollin and his legal counsel sought to suspend operations altogether. When reports came out, a grassroots support swelled up. An organized effort called Save Our Caps stepped in. The organization's efforts managed to pledge Pollin's minimum requirements for season ticket numbers and helped guarantee that the first 8 home games of the season would be sellouts. Pollin relented. Save Our Caps increased the Capitals' visibility in the community and renewed interest in the on-ice product. When interim GM Roger Crozier was let go by the club in favor of 33-year-old David Poile, Crozier claimed it was because he wasn't a yes man to ownership. The pressure was on Poile to please ownership and reward the fans who rescued the team from extinction, and to get the Caps into the playoffs. After 8 years of existence, they'd never qualified. They were woeful defensively and didn't play as a unit. Top-line center Dennis Marouk set franchise records with 60 goals and 136 points, but was considered a floater, a guy who would circle around the blue line and wait for the breakout pass. At best, it was empty-calorie offense. Ryan Walter was the club's best all-around player, their captain and hardest worker. But one player doesn't reset the culture, at least not usually. The Caps had lost $3 million the previous season alone. Poile did what he could to stop the bleeding. He trimmed veterans off the payroll. Acrobatic but injury-prone goalie Mike Palmateer was traded away. And underperforming forwards Jean Pronovost, Bob Kelly, and Oris Kindrachuk were all released. Montreal Canadiens GM Irving Grundman called Poile on his second day on the job to congratulate him. The two of them got around to talking shop. Poile explained that Ryan Walter was a contract holdout. Habs defenseman Rod Langway was too. Langway and Brian Engblom formed what was widely considered the best defensive tandem in the league. The pair had each finished in the top 5 in plus-minus each of the past 2 seasons. Langway had a great attitude, but a tax situation put his career at an impasse in Montreal. Changing laws made it so that Americans working in Quebec had to pay considerably higher taxes. Because of the new law, Langway was taking home only $40,000 of a $150,000 deal. He requested a new contract or a trade out of town. Players in the U.S. with contracts half Langway's size were taking home more than him after taxes. Langway decided to stay with the Habs through training camp, but would walk out on the team before the regular season started. The next time Poile and Grundman spoke, at a league meeting in Toronto, a deal was made to swap dissatisfied players. For years, the Habs lacked grit. Grundman wanted Walter. Poile wanted a top defenseman in return. The deal ended up being lopsided. On September 9, 1982, Grundman agreed to send both Langway and Engblom to Washington along with forwards Doug Jarvis and Craig Laughlin for Walter and defenseman Rick Green. The Montreal media immediately hated the trade. They despised Grundman. To them, this trade was further validation of an already curdled opinion. They were still bitter that he had selected Doug Wickenheiser with the first overall pick over Denny Savard, an opinion the numbers quickly validated. They lambasted him for giving aging veterans Larry Robinson and Guy Lafleur $100,000 raises while trading away Langway and Engblom. Rick Green was considered to be just an average defender, and a significant downgrade from both Langway or Engblom. Jarvis and Laughlin were seen as underrated players who improved team defense, In an appearance on a Montreal radio station, Langway said he was ecstatic to join Washington and that Grunman had made the worst trade in the history of the NHL. Then he set out to prove it. In Washington, Langway was named team captain. By early November, the Capitals were showing typical signs, sporting a 3-7-2 record, tied with Hartford for dead last in the NHL. The club still hadn't won a home game despite the string of sellouts. A game against the Blues on November 5th set something off. In the words of Blues coach Emile Francis, it was a very heavy, very tough game. In the first, a Bernie Federko shot rattled along the goal line. The replay showed that it was swept out of harm's way by Engblom, but both the referee and goal judge counted it. In the third, with under 2 minutes to go in the game, a goal-mouth scramble seemed to end in a Mike Gartner goal, but it wasn't counted. The game ended in a heartbreaking 1-goal loss. 2 nights later, the Caps hosted the Whalers. Frustrations boiled over. Gartner scored 12 seconds into the game. A line brawl started with a fracas between Capital Randy Holt and Whaler Archie Henderson just 4 minutes in. Langway was ejected for sucker-punching Ray Neufeld during the melee. But the Caps were fired up and won the game 6-2. It was the first in a 6-game undefeated streak. It was the first of 3 such streaks the club would enjoy, including one that lasted 14 games without a loss. Langway stabilized the defense, allowing the offensive weapons to operate. Coach Brian Murray played him 32 minutes a night until he took him off the power play unit. Langway would never miss an optional skate, despite the heavy workload. I suggested he take it easy in practice, but he told me that wasn't a good thing to do, Murray said. Then I told him to take a day off. He was the first one out there. His work habits and character on the ice set a tremendous example. Off the ice, he's a very, very good captain. Under Langway's watch, the team culture shifted. Everybody thought about defense first. Offense became a byproduct of good defending. Even Malarchuk bought in, accepting an assignment at left wing and seeing his numbers dip. It didn't matter, because for once in his career, his team was winning. Langway introduced accountability. He wasn't afraid to take a teammate aside and tell him what he did wrong. When coaches wanted to work on something with a player, they found that usually Langway had gotten to him first. This might not sound right, Poyle said, but I think if there ever was any trouble in the locker room, Rod would throttle the guy causing it. Murray said, "Last year it seemed everybody waited for me to do the yelling and screaming in the room. Rod's taking charge in there, and it's gotten contagious. He even has Mike Gartner and Dennis Malarchuk going, and they always just sat there quiet." The result was the Capitals' first winning season, shattering many club records along the way. For the first time in 9 years of existence, they had made the playoffs. The Caps lost to the champs, the New York Islanders, 3-1, winning Game 2 on Long Island. Workaholic Langway helped create a tradition from scratch. Regardless of the playoff result, they knew they could play. The team never looked back. They would return to the playoffs each of the next 13 seasons, including every year Langway was a member of the team. He retired after the 1993 season and was selected for the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2002. Home game attendance remained high, and the Capitals never again faced a credible threat of relocation. Abe Poland sold the team to Ted Leonsis in 1999 for $85 million. In some markets, the difference between a team being in the red and the black comes down to personnel, both on the ice and the front office. Sometimes personnel decisions create a domino effect that makes or breaks a franchise. Timing and talent assessment came together to rescue the Capitals from oblivion. On a final note, and to do a sliver of justice to Grunman, both Walter and Green helped Montreal win the Stanley Cup in 1986. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The NHL was looking for a way to revamp their tired All-Star Game format and look toward international competition as a solution. On his way to Moscow to discuss more opportunities, NHL president John Ziegler stopped by an antique shop in London and found a bull that had been commissioned 150 years earlier by Queen Victoria. Ziegler thought it would make a good trophy, so he brought it back and took it with him to Moscow to pitch his idea for a new on-ice meeting. The idea was to play an NHL All-Star team against the Soviet All-Star team in a 3-game series at Madison Square Garden. It would be called the Challenge Cup. On the surface, it sounded important. It sounded bold. It sounded like a big deal. The only problem was that no one in America cared. By 1979, it was clear. International hockey, especially involving the Soviets, was always a ratings bonanza. But early TV projections for the Challenge Cup looked grim. 300 million people were expected to tune in worldwide, including 220 in the Soviet Union, but only 7 million in America. CBS intended to broadcast the third period of Game 2 during a sports variety show, and that would be the extent of American TV exposure. To make matters worse, CBS threatened to pull the broadcast from its schedule due to a conflict over board advertisements. According to CBS, Madison Square Garden board ads upset their own sponsors and violated FCC regulations. NHL President John Ziegler was in a bind. He wanted to maintain good relations with network television, as the NHL hadn't had a U.S. broadcast deal for some time. Hockey was still seen as niche and regional at the time. The board ads brought in $300,000 in revenue for the NHL, while the CBS deal was worth only $35,000. The board ads stayed. Ziegler continued to negotiate. The NHL All-Stars were picked by the fans, including the starting lineup. The team featured 23 Hockey Hall of Famers, but was thin on defense thanks to illness and injuries to Dennis Potvin, Guy Lapointe, and Brad Park. The Soviet team was considered the best of all time. The lineup boasted 7 members of the IIHF Hall of Fame. Even then, it could have been stronger, but injuries to Alexander Maltsev and Slava Fedosov prevented them from appearing in the tournament. Still, it was a stronger lineup than the one the Soviets had sent to the 1976 Canada Cup. Over the previous 4 winters, the Soviets had sent their big league teams over to North America for friendly exhibition games against NHL teams. The Soviet club's record was 10-5-2 to that point, but the competition was less than friendly. Only 1 week earlier, the Philadelphia Flyers had made the Soviet Wings leave the game over dirty and rough play. Bobby Clarke marveled at the Soviets' discipline to take punishment and not turn around to retaliate. He said he would look at their faces and wonder what their lives were like. Across the hall, Soviet star Helmut Balderas said the exact same thing in an interview. Clarke also said, "No matter what language a guy is talking, if he calls you a son of a bitch, you know it." The games were all sellouts. Inside Madison Square Garden, more than 17,000 had paid $10 to $25 each, anticipating a great game. The best players in the world competing head-to-head, mind you, with very little at stake. Outside the arena, scalpers were hawking tickets for $150. The fan-selected opening lineup for the NHL team was Clarke centering Guy Lafleur and Steve Shutt. Before the game, Lafleur sat nervously in his stall, leg bouncing, knowing he would have to start. Finally, he said to himself, "Let's give everything from the start." Lafleur scored 16 seconds after the opening faceoff, with a deke on Soviet goalie Vladislav Tretiak. After the opening, Team NHL coach Scotty Bowman went with his regular lines. He had Clarke centering Bob Gainey and Bill Barber. They didn't score 16 seconds into their time together, but they shut down the Soviets' top line and Balderas. At the time, Balderas was considered by some to be the most skilled player in the world. But as Clarke said, when you put Gainey on a guy, you just write that guy off. Team NHL hit everything that moved, disrupting Soviet timing. The Soviets countered with a dump and chase strategy that didn't work. By the halfway mark of the first, it was 2-0 NHL, and the Soviets hadn't registered a shot. Team NHL even dominated in the face-off circle, winning 54 of 79 draws. Because it was total domination, most who watched it considered it a boring game. Team NHL skated to a 4-2 victory. Bowman had only dressed 4 defensemen and considered using Gainey as a spare on the back end, but didn't. By the end of the third period, his 4 defenders, Larry Robinson, Serge Savard, Bourque Salming, and Barry Beck, were gassed. Beck said, "We stopped skating in the third, and we can't have that kind of letdown again." Soviet official Valentin Sich was disappointed with the Balderas line and the veteran line of Vladimir Petrov, Boris Mikhailov, and Valery Karlamov for being slow, but he singled out Lafleur for praise. Game 2 would be refereed by Viktor Dombrovsky, who was considered the worst in the world by some. Team NHL was concerned that he would even up the series if given the chance. Before Game 2, a workaround agreement was reached for CBS to broadcast the third period on a delayed feed to edit out images of the offending board ads. When the puck dropped, the Soviets played much better. They had been embarrassed in Game 1, but found their legs in Game 2. To the surprise of Team NHL, the Soviets came out of the gate throwing clean hits and had already adjusted for their patterns. The Soviets would send 2 forecheckers deep to throw the body and disrupt timing passes. For the most part, the strategy worked. By the halfway point of the second, the NHLers had only registered 7 shots on goal. The problem was, they'd scored on 4 of them. The Soviets stuck with their game plan and scored 2 45 seconds apart late in the second to tie the game. A goal early in the third gave the Soviets the lead. The NHL stars seemed to tire out as the game progressed, sitting back and waiting for things to happen. The Soviets won the game 5-4. Afterwards, Bowman said the Soviets had played a superb game of puck control. Dennis Potvin said, "They beat us at our own game." The final game was an anticlimax. Each team had won a game, and each had dominated the game they'd won. Game 3 would determine the winner of the Challenge Cup. Bowman had started Ken Dryden in net for the first 2 games, but turned to money goalie Jerry Cheevers for the deciding one. Soviet coach Viktor Tikhonov went with Vladimir Mishkin. The game was Mishkin's first against NHL competition. Midway through the second, Mishkin got into a battle with Brian Trottier. Trottier crowded the crease. Mishkin gave him an elbow. Trottier countered by knocking him down. Referee Andy Van Helleman gave the 2 coincidental roughing minors. Valentin Sich was livid. He stormed down to ice level, Ziegler chasing behind him. Sich threatened to pull out of the game for one more such call. Sich's contention was that Mishkin was within his rights to defend his crease. It must have felt like a betrayal after Dombrovsky had called Game 2 evenly and in good faith. At that time of the game, the outcome was still in doubt, but the Soviet defense stifled the NHL All-Stars. In the third, down 2-0, the NHL team pressed the attack. Every time Lafleur touched the puck, the crowd chanted his name, expecting something amazing to happen. It didn't. The Soviets took advantage of NHL defensive lapses and added 4 more for a 6-0 shutout. The Soviets had adjusted to the All-Stars well enough that they outscored them 9-0 in the last game and a half of the series. Soviet captain Boris Mikhailov was named MVP and led the Soviets on a victory lap of MSG to a chorus of boos from what remained of the crowd. The NHL lost more than just the tournament. No one in America outside of MSG seemed to care about the Challenge Cup, and those that did now recognized the Soviets as the supreme hockey world power. The goal of the Challenge Cup was to make it hockey's Super Bowl, or World Series. Instead, the concept landed with a thud. With extremely limited TV reach, the NHL's marketing failure marginalized the game. The NHL considered sending the 1980 Stanley Cup champion to Moscow for a 3-game series in September, but that never materialized. The Challenge Cup format was tried once more in 1987. Training camp was finished. The season was set to open in 2 days, but the Kings still didn't trust any of their goaltenders, so they traded for an upgrade. What's a fair price for a starting goaltender? The Boston Bruins were content to receive a first-round pick. Los Angeles agreed, 1-for-1. It was a small trade of convenience. but the consequences of it would haunt one team and define the other for decades. In the summer of 1978, the Kings had lost their reliable starting goalie, Rogie Vachon, to free agency. For more on that story, see our previous video. The Kings' top two goalies going into training camp were career backup Gary Simmons and Mario Lessard, who had been the second-team All-Star for Springfield the previous season, but had never played an NHL game. Doug Keynes, Lauren Mulliken, Don Cutts, and Yves Archambault were even less proven. The pressure was on to get things right and get them done in a hurry. The Kings had a superstar center to build around in Marcel Dion and found themselves in win-now mode. They needed a proven commodity between the pipes. During the summer, the Kings tried to trade puck-moving defenseman Gary Sargent to Cleveland for Gilles Meloche. That didn't pan out. For a time, they considered signing free agent Czech goalie Vladimir Zarilla, though at 35, he was too old to fit into their plans. They still had several targets, including Chico Resch of the Islanders, Bernie Parent or Wayne Stevenson of Philadelphia, Wayne Thomas or John Davidson of the Rangers, and Gilles Gilbert or Ron Graham from Boston. Davidson was the goalie the Kings really wanted. They made a reasonable effort to get him, but the asking price was too high. The Kings weren't wrong in their assessment. Davidson would lead the Rangers to the Stanley Cup final that very season. With little leverage in the trade market, the Kings decided to wait for the preseason waiver draft to find a goalie. This was the time when teams would be forced to send their third goalie down to the minors and make decisions. Resch and Billy Smith were entrenched on Long Island. So were Parent and Stevenson in Philadelphia. That left the Bruins. The previous season, Bruins coach Don Cherry kept Jerry Cheevers, Gilbert, and Graham on the roster all year. Cheevers didn't have a contract for the coming season. Outside the rink, he ran a successful horse breeding and racing business. The Bruins hinted that Cheevers would be announcing his retirement soon. The truth, however, was far more manipulative. The Bruins would be forced to waive one of their three goalies before the season and lose him for a mere $25,000. With news of Cheevers' impending retirement, no team would touch him. It was assumed that Graham and Gilbert would be the tandem moving forward, with Boston seemingly reluctant to move either of them. The emergence of Dave Paro as a top minor league prospect lent an air of credibility to Boston's willingness to part with one of its tandem. The three-goalie system was awkward. Predictably, all three goalies were unhappy, as there wasn't enough ice time to spread around. Graham ended up playing the most. By game 50, he was the full-time starter. His counting numbers were the worst of the three, but his 26, 6, and 7 wins-loss record was phenomenal for a first-year NHLer, though he wasn't a rookie. After starring for the University of Denver, Graham had spent the previous 3 years as the Houston Aeros' top goalie. During that period, he had won 2 Ben Hatskin trophies as top goalie in the WHA and an Avco Cup, including playoffs MVP honors. The Bruins had tried to sign him 2 years earlier after his rookie season and WHA title run, but Graham turned down more money with the Bruins to stay in Houston. Graham started well in the 1978 playoffs, but lost his starter's job on a whim. The Bruins decided to rely on the experience of Cheevers after Game 2. Cheevers led them to a second straight Stanley Cup final that year. By all measures, Graham's first NHL season was a success. He was a proven commodity in the regular season, postseason, and had shown loyalty over salary to a team that wanted him. Kings GM George McGuire looked at Graham's body of work and decided to spend a first-round pick to bring him over to the West Coast. After the trade, Cheevers signed a new contract. The Kings had their goaltender of the future. At 28, Graham was 5 years younger than Vachon and was at the age that most goalies begin to hit their prime. But there were those in the hockey world who criticized the trade right away. Some thought Graham wasn't worth a first-round pick. When the season opened, attendance was down nearly 4,000 a game. The Kings had let Rogie walk in hopes of saving money. early gate receipts showed a greater loss. A few in the sparse crowds chanted, "Rogie, Rogie," as Graham struggled in front of a porous defense. He allowed 28 goals in the first 6 games of the season. Reports indicate that despite the poor record, Graham played well. The Kings lost Sargent to free agency during the offseason. His ability to move the puck out of trouble was sorely missed. In game number 7 of the season, coach Bob Barry gave Lessard his first NHL start. Barry had been Lessard's coach in Springfield the previous year. He thought that Lessard had been the best goalie in the AHL and trusted him. Lessard responded with a shutout. He was just the 4th NHL goalie to pitch a shutout in his debut. He played even better in the next game, a 5-1 victory over Washington. During the performance, the thin Los Angeles crowd exuberated into spontaneous outbursts of "Mario, Mario." By the quarter mark of the season, Lessard took over the starter's job. He finished the year with an .894 save percentage in 49 appearances and helped the Kings into the playoffs. Graham, meanwhile, finished the year with an .862 save percentage in 34 appearances. In late June, it was announced that the NHL Amateur Draft would be rechristened the Entry Draft, as NHL teams would be selecting underage players who had spent the year in the WHA. The league also decided to lower the age of eligibility from 20 to 19 years old. This meant that the 1979 Entry Draft would feature 2 draft classes worth of talent. The Kings finished the year with the 8th worst record in the league, and so the 8th overall pick in the draft would go to Boston. Bruins GM Harry Sinden had identified his man. He was a 90-point junior defenseman, a first-team All-Star. It was Keith Brown of the Portland Winterhawks. He was a rugged defender and a hard worker, one who seemed to fit the Bruins mold. But when Brown was taken with the 7th pick by Chicago, the Bruins scrambled for a consolation prize. They chose Ray Bourque. The next season, Graham played some of the best hockey of his career. From November 27th until the end of the year, he went 6-1-1 with a .916 save percentage. He couldn't sustain it. By late January, he allowed 19 goals in 3 games. He finished the year on a 1-7 run. Bourque, meanwhile, won the Calder Trophy. Graham didn't make it to the end of the calendar year with the Kings. He was sold for cash in mid-December 1980 to the Quebec Nordiques. He finished the year as a member of the AHL's Binghamton Whalers and retired at the end of it. Bourque would eventually become team captain in Boston. He was the face of the franchise, would go on to win 5 Norris trophies, and become the only defender to reach 400 career goals. The Kings featured a top 5 talent in the game in Dion and never made it out of the second round of the playoffs. They suffered the humiliation of 4,000 to 6,000 empty seats nightly until Gretzky arrived in 1988. In the meantime, Lessard was voted a second-team All-Star in 1981, but he would falter the following year. The goaltending situation overall would remain unsettled until Kelly Hrudey arrived with Gretzky. It was a symptom of a larger problem. Owner Jack Kent Cooke had been one of the most vocal and hands-on owners in the league. No matter who it was, the Kings GM would act as a proxy for Cooke. Between 1969 and 1977, the Kings traded away all but one of their first-round picks for short-term veteran help. Tim Young, the lone first-round selection they'd made during that time, was shipped out a month later for a second-round pick. Yeah, you heard that right. They traded a first-round talent for a second-round pick. Young put up 95 points with Minnesota in 1977, the same year Dion struggled through a shoulder injury. What did the Kings have to show for all the wheeling and dealing of first-rounders by the end of 1980? Mike Murphy, Glenn Goldup, and Dion. Even then, Murphy and Dion were acquired through pieces already exchanged for first-rounders. However, had they hung on to their top picks, the Kings could have drafted Reggie Leach or Darryl Suttler, Larry Robinson, Steve Shutt or Bill Barber, Bob Gainey or Rick Middleton, Brian Trottier or Danny Gare, Mike Bossy, or Ron Duguay. Hitting on any of those picks might have been franchise-altering. What came first, the duck or the egg? In this thought experiment, the duck is, of course, the Anaheim Mighty Ducks, and the egg is the idea for the film. The answer to the question is fairly obvious. The real question then should be, what came first, the egg or the duck pond? As a kid, Stephen Brule played pee-wee hockey. He wasn't very good, nor was his team, and the coach was mean, but he loved it. He loved being part of a team. As an adult trying to make it in Hollywood, his interest in the game was reignited by the Gretzky trade. He started going to Kings home games with his roommate, another Hollywood hopeful. Before the end of 1988, Brule was working on a new screenplay, a partially autobiographical coming-of-age story. It's meant to be the Bad News Bears of hockey. When it was finished, he shopped it around to various studios. It was bought by Disney. If you haven't guessed by now, that screenplay was for the Mighty Ducks. The movie wasn't supposed to do huge business, but it became a surprise cult hit when it was released in October 1992. The film made $50 million on a $14 million budget and grossed another $54 million in home video rentals by 1993. Meanwhile, the city of Anaheim had created a problem for itself. It had just spent over $120 million to build a major arena with no tenant. Michael Eisner had taken over as chairman and CEO of Disney in September of 1984. In the intervening 8 years, the city of Anaheim had been extremely good to Disney. One morning, Eisner had a shower thought. Worries about the vacant building loomed heavily over the city of Anaheim. Taxpayers were nervous. City councilors were losing jobs. Eisner decided to stand in the gap. Give me a low-level recent graduate of college business school and I will work with that person alone, he said. I will tell them, if you can find a way to do it where we don't lose any money at all, I will go to Anaheim and solve their problem. The expansion fee to join the NHL in 1993 was $50 million, half of which would go to Bruce McNall and the Los Angeles Kings due to territorial rights issues. Legend has it, Eisner allocated Mighty Ducks movie money to pay for the expansion fee. Stephen Brule didn't get peripherals for the naming of the NHL team, but he was there at the naming ceremony in March 1993. It was a surreal moment for him. 4 years earlier, he'd been daydreaming and brainstorming in the $5 cheap seats. And it all happened because a lawyer convinced the city council to build a field of dreams. In 1985 and 1986, long before the Gretzky trade, a four-man corporation called West Dome Partnership tried to build a large indoor venue in Santa Ana. The intent was to lure an NBA team to the neighborhood. West Dome and the city of Santa Ana had signed a preliminary agreement in July of 1985, but strong opposition from local residents forced the city council to ultimately reject the project. West Dome took the idea to the city of Anaheim. The city of Anaheim hadn't been looking to build an indoor stadium. They were content with their outdoor stadium that was the home to the California Angels and Los Angeles Rams. But when West Dome approached, Anaheim City Council decided to go shopping and listen to multiple pitches. In September 1987, Neil Papiano, a well-known entertainment lawyer, picked up an Anaheim phone book and blindly called 2 city councilors, inviting them to lunch. The meeting was at Le Méridien Hotel in Newport Beach. There, over veal parmesan, Papiano pitched them his client's vision for a world-class indoor arena, acknowledging the financial and political risks, but selling them on excitement. In Hollywood, this is what is called a power lunch. Papiano represented the Ogden Corporation, who managed 5 NBA venues, and the Nederlander organization, International Concert Promoters. At the next meeting, City Council agreed to designate $50 million to the project, and the Anaheim Arena was born. Papiano's bid was chosen because of Nederlander's access to the concert market and Ogden's experience in arena management. Also, A key part of Papiano's proposal was for the city to own the land and the building. Construction costs would be footed by Ogden Nordlander. Eventually, when a tenant would be found, there would be a four-way split in profits between the city, Ogden Nordlander, the tenant, and the tenant's parent league. At this point, the dream target was still an NBA tenant. Papiano hoped to have one playing in the Anaheim Arena by the 1991 season. But then things hit a snag. This is where many of these kinds of stories stall. The entire situation was stuck in a holding pattern. The NBA wanted a suitable arena built before considering locating a team there. The city wanted a team in place before it agreed to build the arena. The city of Anaheim eventually relaxed its standard, and groundbreaking finally took place in November 1990. Construction began in earnest in June 1991. By then, the price tag on the new building was over $120 million. The city council was legally required to spend the money allocated to the project on the project, so they imported a lot of marble. By March of 1988, Bruce McNall had bought up Jerry Buss's remaining shares of the LA Kings, becoming principal owner of the club. A dynamic personality, McNall would woo the Hollywood glitterati at every home game. He had made a fortune trading in coins and collectibles. Now he was friends with Ronald and Nancy Reagan. Papiano enlisted McNall to convince LA Clippers owner Donald Sterling to move the team to the brand new Anaheim Arena. As dynamic of a personality as he was, McNall couldn't do it. Sterling didn't want to make that drive. McNall showed Sterling that he stood to gain an extra $20 million a year with the move. Sterling said no. Just to interject real quick, I've done the drive from Hollywood to Anaheim. It's not really a nice drive, but it's not that bad if you go all the way down southern to Catella. It takes about an hour, but I digress. For a time, in summer of 1992, there were some discussions about the North Stars moving into the building. This was only a couple months after production of the Mighty Ducks movie had wrapped in Minnesota, including use of the Met and cameo appearances by North Stars Mike Modano and Basil McRae. Then the movie came out, and Eisner had his shower thought. The Mighty Ducks name wasn't part of the initial NHL proposal, though it was brought up and laughed off in meetings. Eisner's wife Jane grew up near the Canadian border. Every winter, families would skate on ponds and flooded fields. She started referring to the Anaheim Arena as the Pond. The way Michael Eisner tells it, that was all the permission he needed to just call the new big league team the Mighty Ducks. When the NHL Board of Governors met in December 1992, they decided to listen to expansion bids. Bruce McNall had been elected chairman that June. Before the meeting, McNall told the Disney people that the people at Blockbuster Video were close to getting an expansion deal done, but there might only be room for one entry. Then, he went across the hall and told the Blockbuster Video people that the folks at Disney were close, and there might only be one opening. Eisner and Wayne Huizenga from Blockbuster were motivated by competition, and both bids were accepted for Anaheim and Southern Florida. After the meeting, Eisner said the Mighty Ducks movie was, quote, our market research. The timeline between Eisner's shower thought and the successful expansion bid should probably be measured in weeks and not months. The doors opened at the Anaheim Arena, then renamed the Arrowhead Pond, now the Honda Center, in June of 1993. The first event held there was a Barry Manilow concert. During training camp, Eisner asked the players what they thought of the name. Team captain Troy Loney mumbled and avoided eye contact. Eisner reassured him it would work. They weren't supposed to exist. They were built from a movie. They had no star players. They introduced eggplant and jade to hockey's color palette. Their $7.9 million payroll was the lowest in the league, and they almost made the playoffs. After a bit of a sluggish start, they sold out 27 home games that year, including the final 25. Most impressive of all, it's estimated that 80% of NHL merchandise sales that year was Mighty Ducks related. The Ducks were Disney and the NHL's miracle baby, and they made hockey fun for a generation of kids. At age 10, Jean Ratelle was enrolled in Roussan Academy in Montreal. There, he formed a dynamic duo with winger Rod Gilbert. For 5 years, they rarely lost a game together. Then, at age 16, Gilbert left for Guelph, Ontario to play with the Rangers junior team, the Biltmores. Ratelle was left behind. In Guelph, Gilbert would take every opportunity to tell coach Eddie Bush about his buddy over at Roussan. Day after day, he would pester Bush to bring Ratelle onto the team, praising his skill, claiming that Ratelle was an even better hockey player than he was. Bush agreed to give him a look. Gilbert wasn't wrong. Ratelle made an immediate impact, helping the team improve by 28 points in the standings, jumping from last place to third. Over the following 2 years, he scored 187 points in 95 games in Guelph. In 1961, he made his NHL debut, scoring 2 goals and 3 points in 3 games with the Rangers. Just 3 years earlier, nobody even knew his name. Ratelle was a big guy, but he never threw his weight around. In a career that spanned over 20 years, he never got into a single fight. He never even swore. Perhaps it was his mild manners that kept him off the radar. Over the next couple seasons, after graduating from juniors, Ratelle bounced up and down between Manhattan and Baltimore, the Rangers' primary farm team. The Rangers insisted that Gilbert and Ratelle were the future. But in his first lengthy call-up, Ratelle notched 4 goals and 12 points in 31 games and was labeled a bust. They said he wasn't aggressive enough, didn't dig the puck out of the corners, or fly around at top speed the way Gilbert did. He didn't hit back. There were those who thought he just didn't measure up to the big league standard of play. Sometime during the 1963-64 season, he suffered a back injury. It seemed like a small thing at the time. He didn't miss any games, and it wasn't even reported on in the press. But in late 1966, X-rays revealed that he'd been playing with a broken back. His career, and likely even his prospects of living a comfortable life, were in the hands of the Rangers' husky, cigar-chomping team doctor, Kazuo Yanagisawa. He was the only one allowed to smoke in the Rangers' dressing room. He would approach an injured player and tell him, "I know it hurts, but you're not playing any sissy sport." Often, he'd get players to punch him in the stomach as hard as they could. Yanagisawa had performed a career-saving spinal fusion surgery 2 months earlier on Gilbert. When he returned to action, Gilbert was a new man. Ratelle became one of 5 Rangers to undergo the surgery, as well as Eric Nestorenko of the Blackhawks and Phil Jackson of the Knicks. All returned to action. Ratelle's return, however, was complicated. After holding out for a better contract, he started the 1965 season with the Clippers. But when he scored 9 goals in 8 games, it was obvious he'd outgrown the minors. He was never sent back down again. By the end of the 1966 season, Ratelle had worked his way up to number 1 center. That's when the X-ray took place. Ratelle was out of action for the first 2 months of the 67 season, recovering. When he returned to the lineup, he clearly wasn't himself. He scored 6 goals and 11 points in a limited role in 41 games. Before the following season, Gilbert once again lobbied for his good buddy Ratelle. Rangers coach Emile Francis put the two of them together on a line with rugged left-winger Vic Hadfield, and they formed a perfect trio. They came to be known as the goal-a-game or gag line. Hadfield could work the corners or take hacks in the slot. Gilbert would find the soft spots, and Ratelle would distribute. What made them particularly effective was their ability to find each other blind through traffic. They became one of the most consistent scoring threats in the league. Year after year, they would produce just as their name implied. Coach Francis claimed Ratelle never had a bad practice, let alone a bad game. He was a stickler for habits. He stuck with a flat blade well after the trend for curving sticks had taken off. It gave him a deadly backhand. Off the ice, he played the stock market, smart and steady, like his on-ice game. Never speculating, making good investments, and parking excess capital in saving bonds to check inflation. He hated to travel because it took time away from watching his children grow. Therefore, he put a special emphasis on performing well in road games so that the trip wouldn't be a total waste. He refused to eat pork the night before a game. and if you were with him, you couldn't have more than 3 beers either. He was strict about not having sex before a game, and made Gilbert follow his example. Ratelle said, "Well, if I don't, you don't." Gilbert replied, "How the hell does that apply to me?" One night, Gilbert stayed out late with friends. During the next game in Chicago, Gilbert threw the puck in the corner for Ratelle, but he refused to retrieve it. Back on the bench, Gilbert asked, "What's the matter with you?" Ratelle replied, "You showed me little respect. You don't want to play." "What do you mean I don't want to play? I'm playing. Let's go." No, Ratelle said. "God only helps those who help themselves." Game day meals would be early, 6 hours before puck drop. They knew to get to the rink to concentrate on the game and to prepare sticks. By 1971, Ratelle enjoyed his 4th straight 70-plus point season and was recognized with the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy for dedication to hockey and perseverance. Modest and polite, almost to a fault, he epitomized the classy center. Ratelle commanded so much respect around the league for his ability and style of play that he never had to take the kinds of abuse usually doled out for top-line players. He let his playmaking do his fighting for him. He said, "If I'd been the kind of guy to fight and play rough, I don't think I would have achieved what I have achieved." New York Post columnist Larry Merchant once said that Jean Ratelle is the kind of hockey player all the ruffians would be if they had his ability. When the Brooklyn Americans boarded up operations at the end of the 1942 season, NHL club membership had been reduced to 6. Things would stay that way for a full decade, with no serious applicants for new member clubs, until the Cleveland Barons entered the picture. The Barons were an independent club operating in the American League. The on-ice product was a smash success. They'd won the Calder Cup in 1951. They sold out every game. And for a few tense weeks in the spring of 1952, they were accepted as the 7th member club of the NHL. They had less than a month to solidify their position and make it official. A group representing the AHL's Cleveland Barons called Cleveland Arena Inc. applied for new NHL membership on April 22, 1952. On May 14, 1952, the league tentatively accepted the Cleveland Barons as the 7th NHL team, but they weren't formally approved just yet. The sticking point was financial. NHL President Clarence Campbell expected the Barons to hit certain internal finance targets by June 1st. What exactly those were had never been disclosed. The first financial hurdle was a $50,000 expansion fee. Let's dwell on that figure for a moment. According to the inflation calculator, $50,000 in 1952 would be the equivalent of about $625,000 in 2026. Today, the projected expansion fee for the next NHL club will be $2 billion, the equivalent of $159 million in May 1952. That's more than 250 times the amount of startup capital needed for a new team, a staggering difference. It's estimated that fewer than 100 people globally had $159 million in 1952, let alone anybody who had $159 million to spend. The Barons played at the Cleveland Arena, which had a convenient central location just east of downtown. Seating capacity was limited to about 9,600, with standing room for about 1,500 others. Just 2 months earlier, about 20,000 teenagers had stormed the building for the first ever rock and roll concert, held by local DJ Alan Freed. Fire marshals shut the event down after one song. Seating was on the low end, but acceptable to the NHL Board of Governors. The arena and the team were only 15 years old and had a good, long life ahead of it. Campbell went so far as to draft 2 NHL schedules for the 1952-53 season, one with Cleveland, the other without. The one with Cleveland would feature a 72-game schedule for each team, rather than the 70-game one NHL teams had played for the previous 3 seasons. Ticket prices would increase slightly from $1 to $2.50 for AHL admission to $1.25 to $3.50 for NHL tickets. Barons managing director Jim Hendy projected that the Barons would rake in about $700,000 in gate receipts annually. The Board of Governors also looked at their geographical location in relation to other NHL clubs, player prospects, and working capital, and approved it all. The Barons would use the North Bay, Ontario minor hockey program as its initial feeder system. Hendy walked into the NHL Governors meeting with a check for $25,000. The Cleveland Arena Board of Governors were to meet on May the 24th. Hendy was confident they would vote to approve the necessary monies. The $25,000 check was symbolic. The NHL Board of Governors had been approached before by lowball bidders. The check stipulation was meant to weed out the riffraff. Hendy and the Cleveland faction were the first to meet the requirement. The money was also meant to change perception. Today, we look back and romanticize the original Six era as majestic in its simplicity and limited roster space. But at the time, there were those who would snicker up their sleeves about the little Bush League. The NHL was eager to change that perception. Hendy and the Barons felt they were in a similar boat. The city of Cleveland was mad for its rock and roll and for its sports. The Browns and Indians were major league teams who did big business. Hendy didn't feel the city would tolerate a minor league hockey team much longer. Back then, Cleveland was a city on the grow, hitting their all-time peak of nearly 1 million souls. Both sides felt the sense of urgency to get this done. As the process moved forward, dealing with the NHL Governors started feeling like dealing with quicksand. The $25,000 check and the $50,000 expansion fee were just a taste. Next, a separate $57,000 check was required as equity for the league's reserve fund. Then, a $300,000 deposit in a bank account was required to be earmarked for hockey purposes only. When the Cleveland Arena people met on May the 24th, they couldn't come to an agreement. The meeting stretched on into the next day, and the next. Finally, they approved the release of the required capital. But that wasn't all that the NHL required. The NHL was still skeptical of Cleveland Arena Inc.'s financial soundness. The NHL wanted to see the Barons bring in outside investors, what we might call corporate support today. The timing was awkward. Though the population of Cleveland had peaked in 1950, by 1952 it was already on the decline. Just how severe the decline would be wouldn't be fully revealed for decades, but a combination of processes accelerated it. The post-World War II suburban explosion, availability and reliance on car ownership, and deindustrialization were arguably the biggest factors. Big companies were not willing to commit to the city, and many would soon leave. On an interesting side note, if the Barons had moved up from the AHL to the NHL, the plan was to move the Quebec Aces up to the AHL to take their place. Quebec is the most recent example of a city desperate for an NHL team, but can't get one due to lack of corporate backing. When Hendy walked into the NHL Board of Governors meeting on June 18th for his final presentation, he was ready. He had checks in the amounts of $50,000, $57,000, plus $318,000 for hockey purposes in a private account. He also had an affidavit proving that 60% of the club's stock was owned by Cleveland residents. He felt like he'd done enough. He was confident that the Barons would finish high in the NHL standings, too. He was also adamant that the Barons wouldn't spend another year in the AHL, and that the Cleveland Arena Group would rather suspend operations altogether than do so. Early editions of the news that day blared the headline, "Cleveland Barons formally enter NHL." League governors were uniform in their approval of Cleveland back in May. In June, Red Wings owner and president James Norris had second thoughts. Though the Indians and Browns had healthy and mutually beneficial rivalries with neighbor clubs in Detroit, Norris didn't like the idea of losing his territorial monopoly. But there was one other consideration that Norris was taking into account. The western portion of the American League would be in jeopardy in the event of Cleveland's admittance to the NHL. Norris didn't own the American circuit, but had a healthy feeder system in the Western Division there, and any disruptions during the Wings' then-current burgeoning dynasty could prove disastrous. The Red Wings were the richest club in the league at the time, and the reigning Stanley Cup champions. Norris was also owner of the Blackhawks by proxy, and half owner of Madison Square Garden. His influence swayed half the NHL vote against the Barons' membership induction. For a time, however, the other half was still willing to listen. When the books were finally opened in early July, none of the governors liked what they saw. It turned out that much of the Barons' startup money was borrowed, and on a 2-year repayment window. The NHL didn't like that the Barons had come to them with borrowed money, that it wasn't what the league decided was, quote, the best way. Hendy walked out of the 5-hour meeting furious. He said the situation could have been avoided. If the league had initially told them they couldn't borrow the money, they wouldn't have borrowed it. Hendy was confident that the Barons could cover the cost of borrowing in a single year with an increase in gate revenue and advertising money that the NHL admittance would provide. The NHL, however, did leave the door open for Cleveland and encouraged the Barons to regroup and try again the following year. The Cleveland Arena governors then had to decide if they wanted to play another year in the American League or simply fold. Ultimately, they decided in favor of continuing. The Barons won the Calder Cup again that season. James Norris died in December of 1952. The Barons decided not to renew their bid. They stuck around until financial difficulties finally forced a move to Florida in 1970. Cleveland would finally get an NHL team in 1976. However, it was a bad one, and poorly run. They would play in the cavernous, 18,000-seat Richfield Coliseum, but would fail miserably and become the last major American sports franchise to fold, just 2 years later. Had the NHL accepted the Cleveland bid back in 1952, the league would probably have expanded more gradually. Cities like Baltimore and Cincinnati would also likely have been in the mix. NHL history would have looked a lot different. The Colorado Avalanche dominated the 2022 playoffs. They overwhelmed teams with speed and depth and lifted the Stanley Cup. 1 year later, the roster was thinner. Their captain was gone. Their starting goalie was gone. Their second-line center was gone. But the core remained. Nathan MacKinnon, Cale Makar, Mikko Rantanen. 3 world-class players. Each could carry a team. Together, they were a juggernaut. Colorado finished first in the Central Division and were the hottest team going into the playoffs. They closed the season 30-7-4. They entered the playoffs on a 7-0-1 run. The first-round matchup looked routine. All they had to do was eliminate a wild-card Seattle Kraken team that had no superstar, no Norris candidate, no Vezina finalist, and no playoff history. It wasn't supposed to be complicated. 2 years earlier, Philip Grubauer was part of the problem in Colorado. For years, the Avalanche couldn't get over the hump. In 2021, Grubauer was their starting goalie. He was a Vezina finalist that year, but lost a barn burner of a series to Vegas. Now, he was on the other side. Despite appearances, Seattle had reason to believe in their chances. In 3 regular season matchups, the Kraken had neutralized the Avalanche attack to 5 total goals and held them to a single shootout win. The playoff success of the expansion Vegas Golden Knights was also a recent memory. Still, none of it moved the needle. No reasonable projection gave Seattle the edge. What Seattle had was balance. Throughout the series, the Kraken got goals from 15 different skaters. The attack came in waves. Players like Yanni Gourde and Jordan Eberle buzzed constantly around the puck, turning every shift into a grind for Colorado's defense. Seattle's strategy was straightforward. Get pucks deep, get in on the forecheck, hit and disrupt, wait for chances. It worked. Colorado's stars generated chances throughout the series, but Seattle matched their speed and consistently won puck battles. The Avalanche's power play struggled badly, finishing the series just 2 for 18. The lack of forward depth behind the top line became increasingly visible. Goaltending tilted the ice. Alexander Georgiev had won 40 games in his first season as Colorado's starter and received Vezina consideration. But in the playoffs, he was repeatedly beaten high glove side or over the shoulder. Things might not have gone Seattle's way had Georgiev not allowed a rebound goal to Eli Tolvanen less than 4 minutes into Game 1. That goal changed the temperature of the series. Playoff mystique evaporated. Championship pedigree disappeared. From there, the Kraken settled in and played loose. Where Colorado had broken teams with speed the year before, Seattle matched it. They won races. They won puck battles. After 4 periods, fans at Ball Arena booed the Avalanche off the ice. Across the rink stood Philip Grubauer. Grubauer played some of the best hockey of his career against his former team. If the Conn Smythe Trophy were awarded for the first round, he might have won it. In Game 7 alone, he stopped 34 shots, including 16 in the first period, while teammates blocked 29 more in front of him. Still, the series was shaped as much by chaos as by strategy. Early in the matchup, Seattle's 40-goal man Jared McCann was driven hard into the boards by Cale Makar. The hit was initially called a major penalty before video review reduced it to a minor. McCann never returned to the series. The league later suspended Makar for 1 game. At the same time, Colorado began losing players of its own. Valeri Nichushkin was suddenly removed from the lineup early in the series for personal reasons. Before Game 6, it was revealed that police in Seattle had responded to reports of an extremely intoxicated woman in Nichushkin's hotel room. The situation created legal and personal complications. Nichushkin missed the remainder of the playoffs. It turned out to be a costly and unnecessarily self-inflicted blow. Josh Manson also re-aggravated an injury and did not return. Veteran forward Andrew Cogliano left Game 6 with a fractured neck and wouldn't return. Seattle, meanwhile, kept plugging new players into the lineup. When McCann went down, rookie Ty Cartier stepped into the postseason for his first NHL game and immediately scored, driving to the net to finish a cross-ice pass from Jordan Eberle. Depth continued to define the series. When Oliver Bjorkstrand, quiet through most of the matchup, eventually broke through at the biggest moment. In Game 7, he scored both Seattle goals, carrying the Kraken to a 2-1 lead through 40 minutes. Colorado briefly thought it had tied the game early in the third period when Nathan MacKinnon found the net. Video review overturned the goal for offside. It was the second Avalanche goal erased by an offside challenge during the series. They never got it back. Bjorkstrand nearly completed the hat trick, ringing shots off both the crossbar and the post as Seattle held the line. The Avalanche's stars performed well throughout the matchup. MacKinnon, Makar, Rantanen, and Evan Rodriguez all had strong series. Seattle received goals from everywhere, defended in layers, and consistently turned games into battles of attrition. Their relentless forecheck and disciplined structure kept Colorado from generating the kind of open ice that had defined the Avalanche's cup run a year earlier. Even the venues seemed to tilt strangely. The road team won 5 of the 7 games. The series lead tilted back and forth. Seattle, Colorado, then Seattle again. In the end, the defending champs ran out of time and answers. Colorado had not won a Game 7 since 2002. The loss to Seattle extended that streak to 7 straight defeats in winner-take-all games. In just their second season, the Kraken eliminated the reigning Stanley Cup champions. It wasn't a single moment that decided the series. It was depth, pressure, goaltending, and a long series of small fractures that gradually broke the champions apart. The story of the series was twofold. For Colorado, a series of misfortunes snowballed into something they couldn't overcome. Timely goals against, sudden departures, and overturned goals became too costly. For Seattle, it was about belonging, establishing an identity, sticking to the game plan, and shutting out distractions. The series proved that, even in a David versus Goliath story, a balanced lineup can outshine star power. On June 20th, 1992, 2 NHL teams announced they had acquired Eric Lindros. The Philadelphia Flyers had struck a deal. The New York Rangers had also struck a deal. Both were telling the truth, and the NHL had no rule that said which one mattered. 1 year earlier, the Quebec Nordiques held the first overall selection in the entry draft. They'd been warned by Lindros that he wouldn't play for them. Nordique's coach Pierre Paget announced the pick. It was Lindros. Lindros smiled as his name was announced. Nordique's fans in the building clapped tensely. Nordique's president, Marcel Aubu, shook Lindros' hand and gave him a Nordique sweater. Lindros thanked him for it and graciously draped it over his arm, but he refused to wear it. It wasn't the first time this had happened. 2 years earlier, Lindros had been the first overall selection of the OHL midget draft. He refused to play for the Sioux Greyhounds, so they shipped him off to the Oshawa Generals, whom Lindros led to a Memorial Cup victory. The package Sioux received from Oshawa helped get them to the Memorial Cup tournament the following year. It also must have been satisfying for Sioux that they beat Oshawa to get there. There was also pro-level precedent. 5 years earlier, Mario Lemieux, the last great prospect before Lindros, had done the same thing. Visibly upset, Lemieux refused to don the Pittsburgh Penguins jersey and vowed not to play for them. 7 years later, Lemieux was the reigning Conn Smythe Trophy winner after leading those same Penguins to their first Stanley Cup title. Nordique's brass had reason for optimism. If they managed to keep Lindros, signs were positive. If they were forced to trade him, the potential return promised to reverse their fortunes anyway. Lindros was steadfast. He didn't want to play in a francophone city. Quebec was patient. Lindros had said he would be willing to play in Montreal. Maybe there was a chance to convince him to play for the team that wanted him, knowing they weren't wanted in return. As a small market team, Quebec also understood that Lindros' value extended beyond the ice. Even without immediate contention, he represented a rare commercial lifeline. In August, Lindros accepted an invitation to Team Canada's training camp for the Canada Cup tournament. Those who were there unanimously agreed that Lindros was one of the best players in camp. Negotiations with the Nordiques were non-existent. The Lindros camp insinuated that it would be a waste of his talents to play in a small Canadian market where the tax rate is high and the sponsorship opportunities low. Wayne Gretzky's endorsement opportunities had tripled since moving from Edmonton to LA. The rumor mill worked overtime. Reports indicated that Lindros would be willing to sign and play in Quebec at $3 million per year, but only with a guarantee of unrestricted free agency after 3 years. For context, Wayne Gretzky made $3.3 million a year at the time. It was an untenable request. Still, the hope was real. Many fans in Quebec had already turned on Lindros. During an exhibition match between Team Canada and Team USA in Montreal, Lindros was booed in warm-ups. He was booed when his name was announced. He was booed when he stepped onto the ice for his first shift. Then he delivered a big hit. Then he scored twice and added an assist. By the end of the night, the boos had turned into thunderous cheers. The message was clear. This could work. Quebec had no intention of trading Lindros. Nearly a year passed. Lindros spent most of it playing for Team Canada, winning silver at the Olympics, to go along with his Canada Cup and World Junior gold medals. Further proof that the most coveted player in hockey was the real deal. Over the season, Lindros had been linked to every big money team: New York, Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles. Every star player around the league was linked to rumors involving Lindros. Small details took on new significance. When Lindros' agent, Rick Curran, moved his office to Philadelphia, it was read as a sign. Curran's wife was from Philadelphia. Within a month leading up to the 1992 entry draft, it became clear that Lindros and the Nordiques were at an impasse. There would be no contract. Lindros became the biggest name ever known to be available for trade, perhaps the most valuable asset hockey had ever seen, and he hadn't played a single NHL game. Draft day was a busy one for Paget and Aubu. Ultimately, it came down to two teams, and both of them had seemingly won the Eric Lindros sweepstakes. Quebec agreed to a deal with the Philadelphia Flyers, which would give the Quebec Nordiques a king's ransom in assets. Goalie Ron Hextall, defenseman Steve Duchesne, forward Mike Ricci, 2 first-round draft picks, and crucially, $15 million in cash. Flyers GM Russ Farwell believed he had just made the deal of the century and revitalized a proud club that had missed the playoffs each of the past 3 seasons. No paperwork had been signed, and the formal process had not been activated with the league. But in Farwell's understanding, the 2 sides had come to a verbal agreement. Rangers GM Neil Smith had already presented a concrete trade proposal to Paget. Hours later, when Smith heard the details of the Flyers deal, he upped the ante, offering $20 million, and forwards Tony Amonte, Doug Waite, and Alex Kovalev, defenseman James Patrick, goalie John Van Beesbrook, and picks. What we don't know is who initiated contact, and it's a shame because whoever it was changes the narrative dramatically. NHL lore falls under 2 categories. In one version, Smith breathlessly tracked down Paget before he had a chance to formally submit the trade. This version of events is sometimes circulated among Flyers fans. In the other, Paget ruthlessly used the Flyers' offer to set the market, formally reopening the negotiation process with the Rangers, among others. This version, sometimes told by those critical of the Nordiques, paints Farwell as a naive GM, taken advantage of by a more cagey peer. The record doesn't resolve the discrepancy. Either way, the Rangers deal was too good to pass up. Because the Flyers deal had not yet been formally submitted to league head offices, the Nordiques believed there would be no harm done in taking the better offer. Or so the Nordiques thought. Farwell learned of the Rangers deal almost immediately. From his perspective, nothing about it made sense. Quebec had already agreed to terms. The return had been set. The only thing left was paperwork. Farwell objected at once, insisting the Flyers already had a deal. He argued that a verbal agreement had been reached in good faith and that Quebec had no right to reopen negotiations. The Rangers disagreed. They believed their offer had been accepted just as clearly. Suddenly, the same asset had been sold twice, and neither transaction had been formally submitted to the league. The dispute was kicked upstairs. League President John Ziegler and NHL legal counsel Gil Stein were asked a simple question with no simple answer. Which deal counted? The NHL rulebook did not define when a trade became binding. There was no language governing verbal agreements. There was no mechanism for resolving competing acceptances. The league had no precedent and no authority to simply pick a winner. With no rule to point to and no precedent to rely on, the league did the only thing it could do. Arbitration was invoked. The question would not be which offer was better, or which team deserved Eric Lindros more, but which agreement, if either, actually existed in the eyes of the league. Even here, the NHL stumbled. League procedure required each side to appoint its own arbitrator. Those arbitrators were then supposed to agree on a neutral third party to hear the case. Instead, pressed by time and circumstance, the league bypassed its own process. A neutral arbitrator was appointed directly. The urgency of the moment overruled the letter of the rulebook. The man chosen was Larry Bertuzzi, a veteran labor arbitrator trusted to untangle disputes the league itself could not resolve. Bertuzzi was tasked with an unprecedented decision, determining which of 2 competing trades, both believed to be legitimate, would stand. The league gathered its documents, the arguments were made, and then everyone waited. Lawyers pored over timelines and language. General managers sat with their futures suspended. The second hand on the wall clock hammered compressed time. Entire franchises held their breath. At that exact moment, on a winding country road north of Toronto, Eric Lindros was already gone from it all. He smiled easily. A canoe was tied to the roof of his car. There were no contracts to sign, no arguments left to make. His end of the work had been done. For the first time in nearly a year, his future was no longer being negotiated. It was time to relax. It was a routine play. Blues forward Steve Tuttle charged the net looking for a pass. Sabres defender Uwe Krupp hauled him down from behind. Tuttle slid feet first into Sabres goalie Clint Malarchuk. At first, Malarchuk thought he'd been kicked in the face. He didn't feel pain. He brought his hand to his neck. When he pulled it away, it was covered in blood. He tore off his mask. Every heartbeat sent a spray onto the ice. He pressed his hand to the wound, trying to keep the blood in, but it rushed through his fingers. He slumped forward. The skate blade had severed his jugular vein. He had minutes to live. Attention turned to the scrum that was forming behind the net. Sabres defenseman Grant Ledyard was the first to notice the blood. He started banging on the glass trying to get the attention of the team doctor. He was hysterical. Everyone in the building was shocked. The crease was covered in blood. Some fainted, others vomited. 2 people in the stands had heart attacks. Rick Mahar of the Blues hollered for help. The TV broadcast cut to a commercial immediately. Color commentator Mike Robitaille was crying. Malarchuk knew he didn't have much time. He'd seen a TV show that said a severed jugular would turn fatal in minutes. He was sure he was going to die. Jim Pizzatelli, the Sabres trainer, got there first. "Jim, it's my jugular," Malarchuk said. Pizzatelli said, "Just do what I say. We're going to save you." He took gauze that he kept in his right pocket and jammed it into the 6-inch gash on Malarchuk's neck. Pizzatelli pinched Malarchuk's jugular with his fingers. Malarchuk said, "Jim, I can't breathe." Pizzatelli calmly told him that they had to stop the blood flow first. Then he could worry about breathing. "You're not going to breathe until we get you to a doctor," he said. Pizzatelli helped Malarchuk to his skates and walked him through the tunnel behind his net. A slip and fall would most likely have proven fatal at that point. If it had happened at the other end of the ice, they might not have gotten there in time. Pizzatelli had been a combat engineer and part-time medic in Vietnam. After he was drafted, he was deployed to South Vietnam in 1970 to conduct patrols and destroy bridges used by the Viet Cong. During the second week of his 13-month tour, he and 3 other soldiers were hit by a truck while patrolling a village. Pizzatelli suffered 4 broken ribs. Another American was tossed into a gully where a sheet metal hut decapitated him. They were medevaced out. The young man's headless body lay beside him. The situation gave him a new appreciation for the importance of medical staff. He was part of a unit of 20, not entirely unlike a hockey team. The guys would spend a year together minimum, like a hockey season. What prepared Pizzatelli the most was being ready for the unexpected. Suddenly he'd hear a thud, and the guy next to him would be shot in the shoulder. He'd always dive in with no hesitation. Pizzatelli got Malarchuk to a table in the trainer's room. At this point, Malarchuk was asking for the resident chaplain of the odd. He wasn't in that night. He asked to call his mother, who was watching via satellite feed. Someone had got a hold of her. She sent the message that she loved him. One of the team doctors pressed a towel to Malarchuk's neck with all his weight. He would let up for Malarchuk to breathe, and the blood would spurt out again. He knew that if he closed his eyes, he would never wake up. The ambulance arrived after 10 minutes. They got him on a stretcher and put an IV in his arm. "Put in a couple stitches and get me back out there," Malarchuk said, blood gurgling. No one laughed. A team doctor got into the ambulance and pushed down on his neck with the towel all the way to Buffalo General. There it took 300 stitches to patch him up. There was still 45 minutes left to play in the game. Jacques Cloutier was brought in, and the Blues won it 2-1. Malarchuk lost nearly a gallon of blood on the ice, but only spent 1 night in the hospital. He returned to the lineup in time to start the second game of the playoffs just 2 weeks later. If Jim Pizzatelli hesitated for even a few seconds, hockey loses a player in front of 14,000 people. Instead, the game resumed. In the span of 10 minutes, a routine play became a battlefield, and a former combat engineer became the calmest man in the building. Hockey almost lost Malarchuk that night, but it didn't, because someone who had already seen worse refused to panic.
The 2005 NHL entry draft was considered one of the deepest of all time. Heading into it, Gilbert Brule was one of its top prospects. Less than 10 years later, he had retired and considered taking up firefighting. This is the story of how Brule's career path diverged from expectations. In the fall of 2004, Gilbert Brule was the second-ranked prospect for the coming draft, behind only Sidney Crosby. His playing style was somewhat similar to Crosby's, tenacious work colored by elite skill. He could hit, he could score, he would fight. He was a little wrecking ball out there, but he entered the scene a little ahead of his time. By spring of 2005, he was ranked 4th among North American skaters. The NHL landscape coming out of the 2005 lockout was a mystery. Aside from a few major exceptions like Theo Fleury and Marty St. Louis, undersized players had historically been left off big league rosters. Crosby and Brule were both considered undersized centers, but coaching adjustments and era adaptation were expected to change the landscape. The question then was, how soon? At the 2005 draft, Brule was chosen 6th overall by the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets were still a newer team, scrambling to find an identity. The Blue Jackets needed Brule to be a home run. Against the odds and against type, Brule made the team out of camp. The question is whether the Blue Jackets truly needed him out there, or if the move was motivated by impatience. He picked up a primary assist in his first game and looked comfortable out there. Unfortunately, it wouldn't last. Brule was chosen 1st overall in the WHL Bantam draft by the Vancouver Giants. After a year of seasoning at the Junior A level, he joined the club and quickly established himself. As a 16-year-old, he finished 2nd in team scoring with 60 points and was awarded the Jim Piggott Memorial Trophy as the WHL's top rookie. He finished 2nd in voting for CHL Rookie of the Year, behind Crosby. Note, the Canadian Hockey League is made up of 3 major junior leagues, the WHL, OHL, and QMJHL. As the Giants had done before, there was a strong case for Brule returning to junior for one more full season. He was still physically maturing, and another year spent dominating his peers would not have hindered his development. Instead, the Blue Jackets kept him in the lineup. The decision exposed him to injury risk and placed him in an environment where mistakes were costly and patience was limited. Brule's crash-bang playing style had made him a dominant force in junior. At 18, in the NHL, it was a different equation. He invited contact his body wasn't yet built to absorb. In that setting, fearlessness became a liability. It was still an era where veteran players took numbers. They took pride in hurting opponents, not injuring them, just hurting them. But sometimes it's difficult to control chaos. At the Under-18 World Cup, Brule was named an alternate captain. He scored the gold medal goal for Canada in a 4-1 win over the host Czech Republic. 2 years later, he declined an invitation to Canada's World Junior Training Camp due to professional obligations. In his second NHL game, the 5'10", 180-pound Brule took a crushing hit from Calgary defenseman Roman Hamrlik, who outweighed him by more than 20 pounds. The collision fractured Brule's sternum. More than a decade later, he would say he could still feel the hit. The injury kept him out of the lineup for 17 games. When he returned, he scored his first NHL goal. 10 days later, he left the game with a broken ankle. In the limited time he was healthy, Brule had shown he could play. Used in a bottom six role, he recorded points in 4 of the 5 games he finished. The problem was injuries. Sidney Crosby also nearly didn't survive the era, suffering multiple concussions that delayed milestones and cost him significant time. For Brule, no milestones were forthcoming. After the ankle injury, the Blue Jackets returned him to Vancouver. There, his game reasserted itself immediately. He was named WHL Player of the Month upon arrival. When Brule returned to Columbus, it was clear the injuries had taken something with them. His timing was off. Confidence followed. The Blue Jackets doubled down on a bottom six deployment. Brule was no longer treated as a scorer. His skill set eroded. The organization began reshaping him in its own image, without stability and without identity. Brule's WHL Player of the Month honor came after a 13-game stretch in which he recorded 23 points. He finished the season with the Giants scoring 23 goals and 38 points in just 27 games. Despite the limited schedule, he was named the WHL's second-team All-Star at center. In the playoffs, Brule was named CHL Player of the Week twice. He recorded 9 points in 2 games during the WHL final and finished the postseason as playoff MVP, leading the Giants to their first President's Cup. He scored 30 points in 18 playoff games. Brule's NHL production was disappointing, to put it mildly. He never found his footing on a solid developmental ramp. Aside from sternum and ankle injuries, there were other issues that plagued his early development: knee damage, abdominal issues, concussions. The chatter followed. The label draft bus began to circulate. Columbus assigned him to the AHL, then traded him for a veteran, Rafi Torres, another crash-bang guy but with bigger size and higher NHL production. Brule arrived in Edmonton during a period of organizational instability. The Oilers were struggling, cycling young players through roles and rosters without clear developmental pathways. There, Brule produced the best season of his NHL career, recording 37 points in 65 games. The following year, his production dipped. He was sent down again. When Edmonton tried to recall him, he was claimed on waivers by the Phoenix Coyotes, making a hat trick of organizations that had difficulty getting the best out of their rosters. By that point, the only constant in Brule's career was instability. Brule was caught in a cycle of diminished confidence, demotion, and role erosion. But that was only the surface of what was happening. Brule was dominant at the 2006 Memorial Cup. The Giants were outmatched by the other junior lineups that boasted such talents as Brad Marchand, Alexander Radulov, and Jordan Staal. Brule kept the Giants in games they had no right to be in. While the Giants team scored a total of 15 goals in the tournament, Brule either scored or assisted on 12 of them. Just as he began to find his footing on the ice, Brule's life off it began to fracture. A breakdown in his relationship with his father coincided with the most unstable period of his career. Brule believed his father had misappropriated his funds. His father denied the allegation. When Brule later cut off contact, he said his father threatened him with blackmail. His father denied that allegation as well. What is not in dispute is that the situation became an overwhelming distraction, and it arrived at the worst possible moment. Brule was coming off the best season of his NHL career. He had the skill and work ethic to build on it. He simply couldn't. The accumulated weight of injuries, instability, and off-ice stress took a toll. Brule became depressed. He wanted to speak with a therapist and confront what he was dealing with. The Oilers wanted him medicated and back on the ice as quickly as possible. Brule agreed, understanding the realities of the business. The medication did not help. By his own account, it made things worse. Hockey stopped being fun. In 2005, the annual Top Prospects game was played in the Pacific Coliseum, the Giants' home rink. There, Brule shined, becoming the only player to record a hat trick in the game, and added an assist to help Team Cherry to an 8-4 win and receive Player of the Game honors. Crosby was notably absent from the contest. In January of 2014, after being reassigned to the AHL by the Phoenix Coyotes following just 3 games, Brule reached the end of his threshold. He refused the assignment and was suspended by the club. When Coyotes general manager Don Maloney contacted him, Brule said he was retiring from hockey. 18 months earlier, he had already tried to revive his career overseas, signing in Switzerland during the lockout. He returned home early. He didn't sign another pro hockey contract until November of 2013. He told Maloney he was tired of living out of hotels. He said he wanted to see what life looked like outside of hockey. Even mentioned becoming a firefighter. He said he wouldn't take another chance in Europe. At the time, he probably meant it. 4 years later, Brule was not a firefighter. He was living a different kind of life. His career had carried him from Canada to Croatia to China. In the KHL, he reestablished himself as a reliable veteran, leading Kunlun Red Star in scoring. For the first time since his under-18 days, he represented Canada again, this time at the Olympic Games. On a patchwork men's national team, Brule scored 2 goals and added an assist in 5 games as Canada claimed a bronze medal. When his playing career finally ended, Brule returned home. He settled on the Sunshine Coast of British Columbia, married, and became involved in youth hockey as a skills coach.